Welcome to 6 Essential Life Skills. These essential skills are a practice that I developed taking little pieces from here and little there and applying them into my own life, because what I found is that most of us think of a practice as something that we have to do for an hour in the morning, and we sit in meditation, or we read scripture or different uplifting books, or we journal, or we do something that takes quite a bit of time, either in the morning or in the evening. And those are beautiful practices. I don't mean to diminish them at all. But what I was finding for myself is that they often just stayed in that hour and didn't impact the rest of my day. It's a little bit akin to going to church on Sundays, but not living a spiritual life between the Sundays. And so I really found myself needing something that allowed me to have a conscious, mindful practice every minute of every day in every situation. Now, I won't pretend that I do it in every moment, but I certainly intend to do it in every moment. And what's happened over time is that I catch myself when I'm not being mindful and bring myself back into balance with the 6 essential life skills. And so I want to share with you today those skills so that you too can apply them in your lives. And what I want you to know is that these impact every area of your life. So you can apply it in your just personal sense of self-mastery. You can apply it in your relationships with loved ones. You can apply it at work. You can apply it in the family. Anywhere you need to have some balance and you want to have mastery in your relationships, you can apply it. And we all know that relationships impact every area of our lives. So it's pretty easy to see that this can also be applied with employees. It can be applied with students. It can be applied with co-workers. It can be applied in any area. So I'm going to start with the first essential life skill, and I use hand gestures for these to help them be memory clues, but I also use them because they are so symbolic of the concept, and it helps us with this. So the first essential life skill is to remember who we really are. Now, I use this hand gesture because in India, this is accompanied with namaste, which means the divine in me recognizes, greets, and honors the divine in you. It's that recognition of that spiritual aspect of ourselves, that soul essence, if you will. And it's much akin here in Hawaii to the concept of aloha. If you were a tourist visiting Hawaii, they would tell you that aloha means hello, goodbye, and love. But it's really a much deeper, even more beautiful concept, because it's sharing of the ha, which is the breath of life, and it's a greeting of that shared essence of each person with the other. Also, in the movie Avatar, if those of you who saw that, they greet each other with "I see you." And to me, that's much the same concept of namaste. I see past your personality, past all the things going on, past your avatar self, into your soul, into your essence. I see you. So this first essential life skill of remembering who you really are would be quite simple if we knew who we really were in the first place. However, for many of us, it's not that simple. And we may need to spend a little bit of time before we can remember in developing an understanding and exploring an understanding of who we really are. And so the invitation is to actually do a little bit of work with that. And I will give you some exercises to do that with, starting with just make a list of, if you did know who you really are, what qualities would you embody? What qualities would you embrace? Most of us automatically think, well, if I really were who I really am, I would be an honest person. I would be a kind person. I would be a compassionate person. I would be strong. I would be persevering. I would be responsible. I would be intuitive. I would be wise. And most of us have a pretty common set of words that we would use to describe what we consider to be a highest version of ourselves. And you'll see in the section on insight to self how kids already embody these, but just by way of referencing that, if you think about small children before the age of 5, before they've been contaminated by the world, they embody these qualities already. They're creative, they're imaginative, they're passionate, they're risk takers, they're loving, they're energetic. They have so many of those qualities already very present and available to them. And it's important for us to remember that we too have that. So in remembering who we really are, we're really remembering those qualities that we came into this life inherently with. If sitting down and making a list is difficult and just off the top of your head, you might ask yourself, if I were to be described by others the way I'd like to be described, what words would I like people to describe me with? Now, it's important to recognize that if you wouldn't even want people to describe you a certain way if it wasn't already an inherent part of your soul belief system, that the part of your being wants to fulfill that and embody that quality. I wouldn't want to be called compassionate if I didn't have a compassionate nature. So even sitting down and asking yourself, how do I want to be described? Even if you're not embodying it yet, those words will help you remember who you really are so that you can better align with that part of your being. And if coming up with your own list and coming up with a list from others doesn't work for you, then I encourage you to simply invite who you really are to reveal itself to you and see what shows up. I say that because it's my experience that our spirit, our soul essence, is always trying to wake us up and remind us of who we are. It's always trying to get our attention. It sends us a moment of peace, a moment of creativity, a moment of love, a moment of serenity, a moment of power, a moment of peacefulness, and it's always trying to get us to take notice. But we as human beings have this funny, uncanny way of just kind of dismissing, oh, that was just a coincidence, oh, that was just a thought, that was nothing, oh, I'm not really that, and we just kind of downplay those messages from our spirit. So it's my observation that when we set our intention and invite that aspect of ourselves to reveal itself to us, that we start noticing all of the little signs and all of the little messages from our soul about who we really are. And it allows us to take note. One of my favorite quotes is that the breeze of grace is always blowing, but we must set our sails to catch it. And it's my belief that, and my experience, that our soul essence is always blowing that breeze of grace towards us, reminding us of who we really are. But if we haven't set our sails with our intentions, it'll just blow right on by and we'll miss it completely. So that first essential life skill of remembering who we really are, developing a knowing of who we really are, exploring who we really are, or simply inviting who we really are to reveal itself to us, is the setting of the sails that allows us to become fully aware of our true essence. The first essential life skill is very much akin to the center of the labyrinth, which I equate with our soul essence. It's ever-present, unwavering, and the place of being centered, if you will. And in the beginning, just simply remembering who you really are may be challenging, but once you've done that work to identify who you really are, then later on in the essential life skills, that first one is simply, oh yes, I'm soul essence. And you know automatically what those qualities are that represents. The second essential life skill is to identify your target, and I use this hand gesture for that. But again, when you look at the labyrinth, it's a perfect representation of that because the whole thing looks like a target, including with the bullseye of our soul essence. And when I talk about identifying your target, this is where I mean look at what your intention is, either for a circumstance, a situation, or your whole life in general. So for instance, when I'm working with couples on relationship skills and we sit down and identify our intentions or our target, often what they're talking about is that they'd like to have a loving, intimate, healthy, creative, joyful, harmonious relationship again. So if creating a harmonious, loving relationship is the target, then you want to be mindful of moving in that direction. Now I know that sounds incredibly obvious, but you would be amazed, perhaps, to realize how many people have intentions and goals and what they want, but when we observe what they're actually doing, they're moving the opposite direction. I do this work with teenagers a lot, and I actually give them a physical target, like an archery target, and have them write everything they want in their lives on that target. And they'll write things like love, family, abundance, financial wealth, health, happiness, freedom, adventure, joy, and they have this beautiful list of words that encompasses all of what they want in their lives. And then I have them take another target and write everything they don't want, and they put things like addictions, divorce, poverty, illness, teenage pregnancy, DUIs or drunken driving offenses, all of these things that none of us want. And yet, when I move them into the third essential life skill, which is to self-observe and notice which way you're walking, are you moving toward your target or away from it, they start realizing that they're often moving in the direction of the very things they don't want. And so it's very important for us to sit down and ask ourselves, what is it that I want my life to be full of? What do I want in my experiences? What is it that I'm aiming for? When we do that, we start to realize that there may be things, a whole bunch of things here, but some of them land right in the bullseye. So for me, in the bullseye, it's to live in integrity and in self-mastery with the messages that I teach. That's a very critical element for me. And that would be living a mindful, spiritual, kind, and conscientious life, and responsible. Right immediately outside of that are my immediate love relationships and the people who I care about most in the world. And I want to live in alignment with serving them and being in close connection with them. And immediately outside of that goes into my work world, which is very much in alignment with the other two, is helping the people around me create empowered, healthy, harmonious relationships. Now, it's interesting to look at other goals that may be important to you, like having the house clean might be important, or getting your dishes done, or having a specific job, or getting a specific goal accomplished. However, if we focus our lives on those outer ring goals and miss our bullseye, we actually miss the mark. And it's interesting, someone told me that the word sin in olden dictionaries actually means missing your mark. I thought that was an interesting thing to consider, because for me, if my focus is on getting the dishes done, but I harm my relationships or I don't behave in integrity in order to get that done, then I've missed my mark, even if the dishes are done. And the same concept could be applied to, making a lot of money. A lot of people have financial wealth on their target, but if we focus on financial wealth, but we destroy our relationships and we destroy our sense of self-mastery and integrity, then the wealth will create unhappiness instead of happiness. So spending some time looking at your target is really, really important. And it kind of goes along with in Alice in Wonderland. She's walking along and she hits a place where there's a path that goes in two directions. And I believe it was the Cheshire Cat who happened to be sitting there. And she said, "Hey, excuse me, can you tell me which way I should go?" And the Cheshire Cat said, "Well, where do you want to end up?" She said, "It doesn't really matter." And he said, "Then it doesn't matter which way you go." And that's my experience in life. If we don't have a clear sense of our target and what it is that we're aiming for, when we are presented with choices and options, and we have to make a decision, if we don't know what we're aiming for and we're not really clear on our bullseye, it's easy for us to make the wrong choice. And so taking that time to really sit down and say, what is it that I want in my life? What is it that I want in my relationships? What qualities do I want to embrace? What is the essence that I want to look back on my life and say, I hit my mark? These are the questions that I invite you to explore. It's a really powerful exercise to think about this, and then, as the second essential life skill, remember what your target is. So first you want to identify it, and then you want to remember it. One of the concepts that I love to share sort of as a metaphor is that of scuba diving. It's interesting to note, and maybe you've been a scuba diver, maybe you haven't, but when I first started scuba diving, I didn't know this. And the concept is that when you're on the surface of the water, you can experience waves and wind and whitecaps, and it can be rough as could be. But when you drop in underwater, even just a few feet down, it becomes very, very still. And here on Maui, where the water is super clear, as you drop down even a little deeper, it becomes so quiet and so still and so calm. But then you have the capacity to look up and see the surface of the water. And from underneath, you can see the chaos. You can see the waves. You can see the boat moving back and forth. You can see the raindrops up there even if it's raining. But you're not in all of that drama. You're down here in this place of calm. And so as you're looking at these essential life skills, it's important to recognize that remembrance of who you really are and the process that I'm going to be sharing with you with these 6 essential life skills will guide you into being able to access that quiet, calm place within you, so that then as you look out at your world, and you may see some drama and you may see some chaos and some things that need attending, but from this place of calm and this place of peace and this place of strength, you have the ability to strategize how to manage all of that, before you get into it all. So it's a really helpful thing to understand that these 6 essential life skills give you a new perspective with which to strategize. The third essential life skill is self-observation, and I use this hand gesture to remind you to rise up and observe yourself and notice, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What even stories are you making up? Because I found that creates mindfulness. And when we're mindful, we become aware. So if we self-observe, we become self-aware. And when we're self-aware, we can see what it is that we're doing. We see what it is that we're thinking. We see what it is that we're feeling. And when we do that, we realize that we actually have choices about it. When we have choices, we become powerful. And the power that we have is to either powerfully move toward our target or move away from it. We have those choices. If we don't know what we're doing and we don't realize that it's in our control, then we just become victims of everything that happens and everything everybody else does. And we even become victims of our own way of thinking about ourselves. You'll hear people say things like, that's just the way I am. That's just how it is, as if we have no ability to change that at all. So this self-observation state, I would venture to say, if I had to pick one of the 6 essential life skills and say which is the most important, it's this one. And the reason for that is that if you are self-observant, things automatically start to shift because of your awareness. When you don't know what you're doing, you don't have any control over doing something differently. So this practice of mindfulness and self-observation is incredibly powerful. So how do you do it? It's developing an intention to do it. You just simply start watching, start paying attention, noticing what you notice, noticing what you're thinking, noticing what you're feeling, notice what you're doing. Now I'll give you an example of how this spontaneously happened to me one time. Over 20 some odd years ago, I was in love with this man who he and I broke up, and he immediately was getting married to somebody else. And I was devastated. I'd been with him for several years, and I don't know, my ego got completely triggered by him moving on so quickly. And one day I was in my living room and I was crying and I was really sobbing, and I was doing that, like the little girl cry, where I can't breathe. And all of a sudden I had this spontaneous moment of self-observation, this part of myself that just said, oh wow, you haven't cried like that since you were a little girl. It wasn't a judgment. It wasn't a correction. It was simply an observation. And in that moment, I heard that voice. And one of the things that self-observation does is it kind of separates in your being the part of you doing the observing and the part of you doing the behavior that you're observing. And so I liken it to my soul essence in that moment, saw what my ego mind was doing, and my soul said, oh, look at that. You haven't cried like that since you were a little girl. And that kind of woke up my ego mind to go, wow, who was that? What was that? And all of a sudden I realized that the voice I was hearing was a part of myself. But what was interesting about that was that part of myself was not crying. That part of myself was not even slightly upset about the breakup with this man or that he was moving on with someone else. And I suddenly realized that there was a difference between the way my soul saw my life and the way my ego saw my life. And that in simply observing that and being able to look at that, I realized that I too had that choice of being upset and devastated and making up meaning about my value in the world because of his choices and what he did. Or I could choose to move forward trusting and knowing that this was a good decision, it was the right thing, and that I was moving in the right direction, and that I was in good hands. So when we practice self-observation, it both causes us to become self-aware where we can make powerful choices, and it also allows us that opportunity to hear that other voice, the one that's not triggered by right and wrong, good and bad, and control issues and approval issues. It simply knows we're on our path, and it's there to guide us along the way. So self-observation is an incredibly important skill set. It's also important not only to notice what it is that you're doing and what it is that you're saying, but incredibly important to notice what it is that you're thinking. And I say this because as a relationship specialist, an educator, helping people create healthy, harmonious relationship, I see all the time that one of the biggest things that causes problems in relationships is the stories we're telling ourselves about what somebody else's behavior means when we don't really know. I'll give you an example. When someone texted me, and I wasn't available, so I didn't answer my text. And then they texted me again, and I still wasn't available, so I didn't answer the text. And then they started texting me in capital letters, "Hello, where are you?" And I still wasn't available. I wasn't even checking my text messages. And then came the message, "I knew you never cared about me. I'm never speaking to you again. Everybody else is more important than me." And none of that was the truth. And the problem was that the story that was being made up in that person's mind was causing a devastation to the relationship and sending everything reeling in the other direction, when in truth, I just wasn't available. Now, we often look at that and go, well, that's really silly. But then when we really take a look deeper into our own lives, we realize that we do the same thing all the time. We leave a message for somebody or send them an email or text message them and they don't respond. And we make up some message that we tell ourselves, either about ourselves and our lack of value to them and our lack of importance, or we could go into criticizing them and make up some kind of judgment about what's going on with them, that they should be so rude, and not recognize that there may be some completely different story. So it's really important to self-observe and even look at our beliefs and our thoughts and say, what is the story I just told myself, and is that true? And if we don't know, which is often the case, and we're just making up a story anyways, then the invitation would be to make up a story that leads you toward your target, leads you towards having a healthy, harmonious relationship with that person, or a healthier, harmonious relationship with yourself in your own life, and let this one go, because this belief is actually going to send you reeling the other way. Or it gives you an opportunity to just admit the truth, which is, I really don't know why this person didn't text me or what this person is thinking. Perhaps I should inquire. And then your next encounter with them, instead of feeling hurt and abandoned or angry and judgmental, would be to say, hey, I sent you a text. Did you get it? What's been going on with you? And find out what's going on with them, so that you're not making up a story, that you're actually living in alignment with the truth of the situation instead of the story you're making up. It's interesting to note that in relationships we do things like this all the time. Things like, say I'm getting ready to go out, I get all dressed up and my husband looks me up and down, and then we might go into some story about what he's thinking about that. What is he thinking? Oh, he thinks I look too fat. He thinks I look too thin. He thinks I look too sexy. He doesn't think I look sexy enough. He thinks I wore this last time I went out. And we make up some story about what the other person is thinking about us, when in truth, most of the time they're just going, she's got her shoes, her keys, her purse, she's ready to go. Or even better yet, he might be thinking, wow, she looks great. I'm happy to go out with her tonight. Who knows what they're thinking? But when we think we know, and we react from a place of thinking we know, we often send our relationship reeling headfirst in the opposite direction of where we really want to go. So this self-observation, this skill, is so imperative, because it allows us to discover what we do, what we say, and what we think, and examine, where will that lead? And that skill alone is worth millions of dollars, because when we realize the power of what we do, what we say, and what we think toward creating what we want or creating what we don't want, we become immensely capable of changing our direction. There was a really funny email that went around several years ago that illustrated this concept of how what we think can totally send our relationships and our situations reeling in the wrong direction. And it was, I think it might have even been a cartoon email, because there was a boy and a girl, a young man and a young woman, sitting in a car, and he's driving down the road, and she looks over at him and she says very sweetly, "Do you know what today is?" And he thinks for a minute and he goes, "No, what's today?" She said, "It's our 6-month anniversary." And he says, "Wow, that's awesome. 6 months. Happy anniversary, babe." And reaches over and kind of pats her on the leg. And then you see them go into their own minds. And he starts thinking, 6 months. Did I get the oil changed before I started dating her or after I started dating her? wow, I think it might have been right before. I should probably get the oil changed. Meanwhile, you get to peer into her head, and she's thinking, he's not saying anything. He must be thinking how he can't believe he made it this long, how he can't stand that he's been with me for 6 months. He probably wants to break up. And the next thing she blurts out of her mouth is, fine, let's break up. And this poor guy sitting in the driver's seat can't figure out how they went from this loving moment of celebrating their anniversary to breaking up with nothing said in between. And it's a perfect example of the trickery of our minds and what we do to ourselves and to each other when we don't stop and really examine what we're seeing, what we're saying, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, the stories we're making up, and the impact that they may have if we act in alignment with them. So it's a very powerful tool to observe. The fourth essential life skill is then to make the choice. And what I mean by that is that when we realize, when we self-observe and we look and we see, if I operate in alignment with my target, I'm going to head this direction. And I will more often than not suggest that this choice would be operating in alignment with our ego mind, which I explain more in other of the sessions. And if I choose to operate from my ego mind, there's a good chance that I'm going to reel out of control and destroy something or hit the target I don't want. So that requires making a choice. And that choice is really whether to operate in alignment with my authentic spirit self or operate in alignment with my ego mind. Now, when we operate in alignment with our egos, we tend to create more of the drama, more of the disharmony than we want to have in our lives. And when we operate from our authentic self, we're able to shift things so that we get what we want and we create more loving, harmonious relationships. But that requires the decision. And for me, I've noticed that when I self-observe and I look at my choices, if I spend a moment kind of imagining where that choice will end up, it's a very powerful guidance for making the decision. I kind of liken it to those sci-fi movies where there's a person and all of a sudden the room freezes and everybody else stops while that person kind of figures something out, and then everybody else starts moving too. When you practice self-observation and inquire as to where your actions or your thoughts or your words will lead, and then act, let everybody else start moving again. It doesn't happen in reality, but it seems like time slows down while you think these things through. But it only happens in one breath, and you don't even skip a beat with other people, which I'll share with you in a moment. But when we do that and we recognize where is this going, we become incredibly powerful over what happens to us. I also liken it to a pool player. So an excellent pool player, or let me just start with a good pool player. A good pool player, from what I understand, not only goes for the shot that's immediately in front of them, but also the shot after that. But an excellent pool player will set up several shots down the line. Like, if I do this, the ball will go here, and then the ball will go there, and then the ball will go here. And they actually set up several plays in advance by just being mindful of what's going to happen from their next shot. And that's very much what I'm talking about with the self-observation and making choices, is really looking to see what you do and what you say and what you're thinking will lead where. And when you observe that, then you get to choose. Do I want to end up over here, or do I want to end up over there? And that choice point requires, in my experience, transcending the ego mind and moving back into alignment with our authentic spirit self. So for me, that once I've made that choice, and then I move into what the fifth essential life skill, which is to recalibrate with who I am. There's a transition point between making the choice and moving back into alignment that I call taking the down elevator from the ego mind to the spirit. And for me, and it may be different for you, I can't say for sure, but in my experience, I do this with a breath and an intention. A breath and an intention, and bringing myself back into balance with my authentic self. It also is, to use another one of those spiritual cliches that I'd like to explain, it's helpful to bring yourself into the present moment as you make that shift. Because so often what's happening when we're in our ego minds is we're either thinking about something in the past that's influencing our decisions, or we're worrying about something in the future that's influencing our decisions. And when we bring ourselves into the present moment, we're dealing with what's really right here, right now, at hand. In that example of that young couple, he was thinking about 6 months later and what he needs to do. He wasn't present. And she was thinking about what that meant and she wasn't present. And if they had both taken that moment to take that deep breath, bring themselves back into balance, they would have been able to stay present to celebrating their anniversary, and their relationship would not have run amok. So when I talk about taking this down elevator into your spirit, it's helpful to just bring yourself into the present moment. And by that I mean become aware of where you are right now. Bring your thoughts into what's going on right here, right now. It helps to become aware of your breath, or where you're sitting, or what you're hearing. Bring yourself into alignment with your senses. Now, I want to talk about this idea of being present for a minute, because it was one of those spiritual cliches that I heard and I didn't understand. Why do I need to be present? What does that mean? And where else am I going to be? I didn't understand. But when I started practicing it and bringing myself into a mindfulness of being right here, right now, I experienced what I call the opening of the door into my spirit. When we're in our ego minds, when we're thinking about the past and the future, and we're thinking about what we think somebody's thinking about, we're not present, and we have all these influences affecting us. But when we take a deep breath, bring ourselves into the present moment, it magically gives us access to our authentic self, where we have access to the skills, the tools, the qualities, the strengths, the resources that we need for managing what's in front of us. And when we're able to do that, transcend our ego, bring ourselves back into our balance, into the fifth essential life skill, which is to recalibrate with who we really are, to reconnect with that part of us that's creative and imaginative and intuitive and wise and discerning and capable. We then discover that from here, grounded in the present, we can handle the past if it needs cleaning up. We can plan for and strategize for the future if it needs attending to. We can manage our love drama, our money drama, our health drama, our fitness drama, whatever it is, grounded in the authentic resources that we need in order to handle those things. But when we're spinning out in the ego mind, making up stories and reacting to things that aren't even true, there's almost no chance we're going to hit our target. We're going to go reeling the other way. To recap where we are so far, I just want to remind you that the first essential life skill is to remember who you really are, which as part A may be develop a knowing of who you are so that you can remember it. The second essential life skill is to identify your target, know what you're aiming for. The third essential life skill is to self-observe, because in self-observing you become mindful of what you're doing, what you're saying, and what you're thinking, and that offers you the choice. And the fourth essential life skill is to then make that choice. Based on where you can predict your behaviors will lead. Once you've made that choice, it requires recalibrating the fifth essential life skill with who you really are. But to move from that choice into recalibration, you may have to transcend the ego mind and bring yourself back into balance. And by doing that, it's taking a deep breath and an intention, bringing yourself back into the present moment, where you'll gain access to all the qualities and all the skills and all the strengths available to you, rooted and grounded in the present moment, instead of being thrown off by the past and the future. Now the sixth essential life skill, that is to choose your words, thoughts, and actions in alignment with who you are and what you're trying to create. There are a lot of things that we can say and do that will send us reeling in the opposite direction. And most of us are quite familiar with them because that's what we do on automatic pilot. We let our ego run our ship, if you will. And our ego, which I'll explain in another session more deeply, but the ego mind is always trying to protect us. And in so doing, it always tells us to say things and do things that send us the wrong direction. Even though it doesn't want harm to come to us, it wants us to be protected. The other challenge of the ego mind is it sees with blinders on, and its blinders are, I will only be happy if this person changes. Everything will be okay if this person does something different. When we drop into our authentic self, we remove those ego blinders, where we move into a sense of recognizing that what we do, what we say, what we think, what we make up, even the energy that we hold, will change the course of the direction of our lives and our relationships. And so that recalibration with who we really are, and then aligning our words, thoughts, and actions with what we want to create, makes us immensely powerful. Sometimes when people start hearing about these 6 essential life skills, the immediate reaction is, wow, how am I going to remember all these? And what was the first one? What's the second one? And it seems really cumbersome and a lot of work. And then they often come up with the belief system that this is going to be difficult. Wow, this is going to be hard. And I invite people to, even when they're self-observing, observe their thoughts and their beliefs. Because just because you believe something doesn't mean it's true. And just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it isn't true. So even the belief this is going to be difficult, I want you to look at and take a peek. Will the belief that this will be difficult lead you toward what you want to create in your life, or will it make it more challenging? And even question that. Well, if you don't know if it's going to be difficult, then say, this might be difficult, it might not be difficult. Let me experiment with it and see. My hope is that what you'll find is that it's not as difficult as you think. In the beginning, it's a little more challenging because you have to first figure out who you really are in order to remember it. And you have to first identify your target in order to remember that. But once you have those two down and you practice self-observation on a constant basis and just develop that sense of mindfulness, it all happens in one breath. One breath. So let me give you a couple examples of that. So several years ago, I was working with a publisher and an editor at a publishing house, and I sent her some ideas for several books that I wanted to write. And she wrote back to me and said, Eve, I love these. Let's do it. Now, as an author, you have to know when a publisher loves your work, it's a very, very exciting moment. So I was dancing around doing the happy dance and thinking this was going to be great. And then it occurred to me she didn't say which of the books she liked. So I emailed her back and said, which one did you like? And she wrote back to me and said, Eve, it's not a matter of which one. It's a matter of which order. Now I am completely ecstatic because what I heard was that this publishing house was interested in publishing all of my books. So I was completely ecstatic. A couple weeks go by, a week or whatever, and I didn't hear from her again. So I thought, well, okay, I got to write back. So I wrote back to her and said, so where do we start? Do you want me to do a proposal, or do you want to send me a contract, or do you want some some chapters, or how do we get going? And she wrote back and said, I'm so sorry, Eve, I've quit working for this publishing company, and I'm not going to be able to do your books. But there's a new editor, and she's in your community, so I'm sure you'll have a good relationship with her, and everything will go just as well. So after I got over the initial disappointment that my biggest dreams were now no longer a reality, I made an appointment with the new editor. And the first day that we were supposed to meet, she canceled the appointment. So I made another appointment with her. And the next day, she canceled the appointment as well. Now I'm starting to feel a little bit concerned and hesitant. And on the third try, she came to meet me at a restaurant. And I walked over to her. I introduced myself. I said, hi, I'm Eve. And she said, yeah, I know. I just want to let you know I'm totally underwhelmed with your writing. Now, I want you guys to understand that that was like a sucker punch to the gut, and I was completely unprepared for it. And as I've mentioned before, and as I will mention again, the ego mind's job is to protect, and immediately my ego went into protection mode. I was like, whoa, this is not safe, this is not safe. Now, because of the 6 essential life skills, I was able to go, wait a minute, let me see what's going on here. Now, in that moment, I did not have to think about who am I now, and spend any time at all on that, because I've already done that work, and I knew who I am as an individual and what I'm here on the planet to do. I also didn't have to identify my target in that moment because I already knew that as well. I knew that my bullseye was to live in a mastery and alignment with my message and in integrity, and that creating healthy, harmonious relationships with my immediate world and the world at large were next. And out here, a relationship with the publishing house was definitely on my target. So I didn't have to think about that. I simply then went into self-observation, and this is where it was kind of comical, and it was much akin to that moment, like I said, where everybody else went into freeze frame, because all of this only happened in one breath. But everybody else went into freeze frame while I listened to my ego give me advice. And my ego, which is totally intending to protect me, went into panic. And it was as if I could watch, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those cartoons, like, I don't know if it's Elmer Fudd, where his face starts turning red when he's mad, like a thermometer is rising, or like one of those sci-fi movies where the mask starts taking over the guy and then he turns into a villain. And I could tell that my ego was rising and my anger was rising, and I knew that if it got above my nose, I wouldn't be able to take that all critical breath to bring myself back into balance. And so as I was observing this, I knew I needed to take action quickly. I simultaneously was observing what would happen if I said any of the things that the protective nature of my ego mind was telling me to say. It was telling me to tell her she doesn't know what she's talking about. It was telling me to tell her, well, the last editor told me, and like defend myself. Everybody else thinks this about me, but you, it must be you. And going into all this negative either defensiveness or criticism of her, neither of which would have hit the target I wanted. And I could see that I was going to end up destroying this relationship if I didn't regain mastery of my words, my thoughts, and my actions. So I immediately moved into essential life skill number 4 and made the choice, took a deep breath, reconnected to who I really am, and kept in mind what my target was. And I said to her, I'd love your help improving that. Immediately, she dropped her kind of negative energy and gave me a compliment and told me she loved my blog on their magazine and went into being kind. And we had this great conversation, a great dynamic moment. I really enjoyed her. I think she really enjoyed me. And the outcome of that meeting was very much more in alignment with what I was trying to create, both because I knew I had behaved in alignment with my integrity. So no matter what the results of what she did was, I knew I'd hit my mark. But we also created a healthy relationship with each other. Now, I like to tell people that she still chose not to work with me on some of my projects, but she still chose to work with me on some of my other ones. And so I share that with people because sometimes even when we hit our mark, other people have other agendas that there's nothing we can do about. And when she called me back to tell me she wasn't going to move forward on some of the other projects, she was very kind about it and had a great explanation for why and the direction of their publishing efforts and how it didn't fit in. And it wasn't a critical attack on me. It was more of a, this is the dynamics of our situation. And I knew that we had hit the mark with each other. And I realized that had I done any of the things my ego mind wanted to say or do and went reeling this way, that I not only would have missed my mark in integrity, but I also would have damaged my relationship with that publishing house. And that could have damaged, it could have had a negative ripple effect where it damaged my reputation in all of the body, mind, spirit industry because it's a relatively small community. So I share that story with you because in that moment, my ego was quite loud and quite upset, and it was screaming at me to say all kinds of things in reaction to her, all of which would have crashed into the very reality I did not want to create. Simply using the 6 essential life skills in one breath realigned with what we wanted, what I wanted to create, and created a more harmonious relationship with her. I also had another situation where I was in a county meeting. I was trying to get some county issues managed, and I kept encountering one particular person at the county office or at this government office that was really difficult to work with and kept feeling to me like he was obstructing our progress on what we were trying to do. So I finally had to have a meeting with the county, the department head, and all of his inspectors and county employees. And I had all of my team over here, my people backing me up. And we were trying to have a meeting in which we came up with a solution that worked for them and worked for us. And somewhere along the way, one of the inspectors from the other camp really got angry with me, and he virtually jumped up and just started yelling at me and throwing his hand in my face and telling me how he felt about what we were doing. And again, the 6 essential life skills popped into play, if you will. I immediately didn't have to sit around and think about who I am because I already knew. So in that moment, all I had to do was remember. And I knew that what I was trying to do was create a working relationship with this government office so that we could achieve the goals that we had. So I didn't have to think about that. I just had to remember that. Then I went into self-observation, and much akin to the previous session, my ego was freaking out because somebody had just attacked me and thrown all this energy in my face and accusations, and my ego was like, no way, and ready to spar. Now, in my mind's eye then, I watched where my behaviors would go if I followed followed through. And I realized that in my ego mind, everybody's in freeze frame at this moment, my ego wanted to jump up on the table and start sparring with the guy like we're in a boxing match. But all of a sudden I went, well, what will happen if I do that? And then I realized that the department head over here would have no choice but to separate these two misbehaving children, if you will, and send us to our own corners of the ring. And then he would have to stop me from behaving poorly, just like he'd have to stop his employee from behaving poorly. And when they walked out of the room, they would have all kinds of fodder for, yeah, she's a really difficult person. I understand why you've had such a hard time with her. And all of the power would have been in their camp. And so what I did was I practiced the 6 essential life skills. I saw all of this going on, took a deep breath, bring myself back into alignment, addressed the man who was attacking me and said, it's not okay with me for you to treat me this way, and then turned to the department head and said, this is what happens every time we try to resolve problems with your department. We're treated like the bad guy, like the criminal, when in actuality we're trying to resolve a problem. And everything changed. I invite you to practice these 6 essential life skills all the time, even on things that don't matter. When the waitress doesn't bring you a fork or somebody cuts you off on the freeway or on the highway, and just notice what your reactions are, what they normally would be when your ego mind is running the show, and notice what the result will be. And then just see if you can simply take a deep breath, reconnect, realign, and move your actions, your words, your thoughts, and your beliefs into alignment with what you want to create. When you practice on the little things, you suddenly realize that you have this skill set available to you on the big things. So when your spouse says something unconscionable and unconsciously, instead of sending the whole relationship reeling in this direction, you have mastery to bring it back into balance. Or when your employee or your boss or a stranger or any situation comes up, you're able to immediately have access to these skills so that you can turn this situation around. So just as a reminder, the first essential life skill is to remember who you really are. The second essential life skill is to identify your target. The third essential life skill is to self-observe. Notice what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're believing, and then make the choice. Do you want your behavior to move in this direction or that direction? Then take that deep breath, along with an intention, bring yourself back into calibration with who you really are, and then choose the next words, the next thoughts, the next actions, even choose your beliefs so that they move you in the direction of what you want to create. When you do this, you will discover you are immensely powerful for turning any situation around and bringing it back into alignment with what you want. I wanted to share with you a process of values clarification that gives you an opportunity to take a little bit deeper look at what really matters to you and what you stand for. I did years ago, I was looking through the Franklin Day Planner materials of a very time management process that I was really drawn to. And one of the things that they explained was that Benjamin Franklin actually identified his 12 governing values, the 12 principles that he was really dedicated to. And then he spent a month and dedicated each month for a year to one of those principles and worked really hard for the whole month on mastering it. And then he went to the next one and brought the other one along. So it wasn't like I'm doing this one and then no more. I'm doing this one and now I'm doing this one and this one. And so he might have had things like honesty or service or forgiveness. I don't know what his were. But it was a really interesting exercise. So I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down and figure out what my governing values are. What do I truly believe in and what matters to me? And what I found is that when we really know what we believe in, when we really have identified and taken the time to figure out what's important to us and what matters to us, they become like signposts that lead toward our target. Because, for instance, if I had a goal of making money, but I also had a value of being honest or being a hard worker or being in service to others, that would help set up the guideposts that lead me to this direction, when in fact there may be other pathways to making a lot of money. I could sell drugs, I could be a prostitute, I could rob people. I mean, there's a lot of other things one can do to make money, but they don't fall within the guideposts of my value system. And so identifying your values becomes a very helpful process in directing your steps or your path toward what you want. So I sat down and diligently started writing down what I thought my values were. And what was interesting about this is they tell you to identify them and then define them and prioritize them. And you want to define them because what love means to me may be very different than what love means to you. What family means to me may mean something completely different than what family means to you. And so this is a really good exercise to do in partnership as well. As love relationships and romantic partnership or business partnership, because when you start to define some of these words and these concepts, you may find that you and your partner are speaking the same words, but you're not speaking the same language. And so it's really important to take a look and see what these different values mean to you. So as I'm writing down my values and things are coming along, I realized I was humming a song the whole time I'm writing them down. And I'm thinking, what's that song? What's that song? And I couldn't figure out what it was. And at the very end, when I had my list finished, I tried to figure out what the song was more intently, and I realized it was the Campfire Girl Law, which Campfire Girls back when I was a kid are much like the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts are today. And I started thinking about it, and the words of the song were worship God, give service, and knowledge pursue, be trustworthy ever in all that you do, hold fast unto health and your work glorify, and you will be happy in the law of campfire. And I thought, oh wow, that's a list of values. And then I looked at my paper, and I had the exact same values down on my paper. Now, on one hand, I thought that was that's pretty cool that that song popped in my head and that's what I wrote down. But taking another look at it, it kind of concerned me. I suddenly looked at this list of values that I wrote down on the paper and had to ask myself, are these really mine? Or was I just infused with this message through this song I learned as a child? And these aren't even mine. I'm just reciting or regurgitating somebody else's values. And it gave me an opportunity to step back and look at them and really hand pick and choose whether these were my values or not, and commit myself to them. And happily for me, my parents chose an organization that had values that were pretty cool. And so when I went back and looked at them, worship God, yes, I love that. Seek beauty, give service, pursue knowledge, all of the things on the list I could put my heart behind consciously and with choice, authentically, rather than just by brainwashing. So I invite you to do this exercise as well. Really stop and sit down. Think about, what are your values? What do you stand for? What's important to you? Or what do you stand up for? What are your guiding principles? And then take another look at them after you've just brainstormed them all, and take another look and say, is this really mine? Does this really matter to me? Do I really believe in this? Or is this just something I was fed from my parents or my school or my church or my community? The reason it's important is because once you choose it, then it's really yours. And once you've consciously chosen it and it's really yours, you're far more likely to act in alignment with that. And I invite you to do the same thing with your code of ethics. A code of ethics is the rules we live by. And we often don't even think about the rules we live by. We just live by them. But if you take a moment and write down, what are the rules you live by? And just notice, do things like children are to be seen and not heard pop up? Do you really believe that? Or is that something said to you? Honesty is the best policy? Really? All the time? No matter what your honesty is? Check and see, do you believe that? Just take a note of what your rules are, and then see which ones you actually are committed to living in alignment with, which ones you break all the time. Are you breaking them because you don't believe in them? They're not really yours? Or do you need to do some work on getting in alignment with those rules because they are really yours and you're living out of integrity? It's an excellent exercise for helping to guide you along your path toward what you want to create and living a harmonious, joyful life with yourself, first and foremost, in integrity and in self-mastery, with your values, your personal code of ethics, and with other people as well.